Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time frame it is for you. I want to welcome you to the Cross Cultural Coach VideoCast. My name is Jay English, and I've got a great show lined up for us tonight. I pray that everything's going well with everybody. Hopefully you haven't slapped anybody this week. If you've thought about it, but didn't actually do it, we'll take that. Because sometimes you think about stuff, but you don't do it. See, that's called resisting temptation. So I would appreciate everybody that resisted the temptation to say some stuff maybe you knew you shouldn't say, not to put hands on some folks maybe you wanted to. And we're just hoping that everything has gone well for you this past week. I'm really excited to be here. It is a wonderful opportunity to have more conversations around something that's near and dear to my heart. For those of you that may not know me or may be brand new to what we do, I started an organization a little over a year ago with my wife called Plain English, and it's a nonprofit where our mission is very simple. It's to build bridges to address issues of race and culture. And we have a lot of issues. There's a lot of things happening in the world. There's a lot of problems that we're navigating. And I found some people that I believe are going to want to know. You're going to want to know about, you want to understand what they're doing. And it intrigued me to such an extent that I actually reached out so that I could see if I could get them on the show with me tonight. And I'm glad to say that they accepted. So I want to, first of all, give a big shout out to Pastor Brandon Levy. That is my guy, my A1. He hit me up and was like, hey, with all this work you're doing, there is an organization, I want to see, have you heard of them? And they're called Every Black Life Matters. And I was like, no, I actually hadn't heard of them yet. And it sounded really intriguing. And he said, hey, you have to check them out. They're actually a biblical alternative to the Black Lives Matter organization. And they're doing things a bit differently. They're really looking at things from a biblical standpoint. And that made me go to their website. And what I saw on their website, it absolutely made me look at it and say, OK, I have got to reach out to these people. Like literally, if you go to their site, it talks about chasing after real justice, and real, the R represented righteousness. They mentioned being a non-Marxist organization, which I found hilarious because one of the primary concerns for a lot of people when they were dealing with the original Black Lives Matter organization was, hey, they're Marxists, that's on their website. Look at all the things they believe. We just can't deal with that. We can't stand for that. And when I went to their site and I started reading through the things that they stood for, things along the line of the nuclear family. We're talking about active fatherhood, free markets, educational choice, criminal justice reform, nonviolence, all the things that I kept hearing many people, specifically in the places where I was speaking, where it was predominantly Caucasian, they were saying like, hey, I can't even rock with what you're trying to do because this organization is out here and they don't seem to stand for some of these things that are really important to us. So what I want to do at this time is bring on two people that have offered to spend some time with us. And let me go ahead and get them in here with me. I have Mr. Kevin McGary and also Neil Mammen. And I want to welcome you both to the Cross Cultural Coach VideoCast. Can you say hey to everybody?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jay, for having us. This is a real honor and privilege for us to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. This is great. Thanks for your very kind words.
Well, I appreciate what you all are doing. We were talking a little bit before we got started, and I said it's been difficult. I haven't come across many people who are specifically out here teaching and training. And I don't mean outside. I don't mean necessarily inside the church. I'm talking about outside the church, who are going into corporations, businesses, organizations and saying, hey, there's a biblical aspect to this that we have to apply to this problem. So when I came across you all, I know that's absolutely what I believe in. I believe that this is two sides of the same coin. God said that we should love him with all our heart, our minds and souls. And then he said we should also love our neighbors as ourselves. So I look at this like, man, we are reconciling people to God first and foremost. But then there's also this work of reconciling ourselves to one another. So coming across what you all are doing has been a godsend for me. And I wanted to absolutely build a relationship, but I also wanted to bring you all to talk to the people that have been following the work that we've been doing on this side. And I just want to kind of dive in because I really want to do a whole lot less talking and do a whole lot more listening. I want to just start off for both of you. Why did you form this organization? Every Black Life Matters. And y'all know how much of a trigger word that Black Lives Matter phrase has been. I have to be careful where I yell that out at, man. But what made you all decide to launch this organization?
Yeah, Neil, if you don't mind, I'll take this and then you can fill in. So actually, Neil's wife came to him, and he came to me after seeing all of the carnage, devastation, violence, rioting, burning of Black and brown businesses mostly last summer. And Neil said, "Hey, Kev, I mean, we haven't really worked together. I mean, we're in the same field in the sense that we're both IT executives, IT folks, but we haven't really worked together in a ministry cause." But he said, "Look, I think this is something that we should think about." My wife was asking me, what's our response to this? And in reality, people of faith don't have advocacy here. They don't want to be associated with BLM because of the Marxism and the anti-family and the anti-fatherhood and all of the other stuff that they're not about. And he said, look, this is potentially a good opportunity for us to, work together on this. And so I said, well, let me think about it. So we thought about it for a couple of days, and we actually came up very strategically with our name, Every Black Life Matters. And the reason why is this. We felt that the Lord was opening a path for us to be in the exact same lane as Black Lives Matter. So we wanted to leverage some of the marquee, but we wanted to be in the exact same lane, but going a different direction. We wanted to reframe the argument completely. The reality is if before Black Lives Matter generally, every single Black life must matter specifically.
Yes.
And if every single Black life doesn't matter specifically, then you're a hypocrite. If you say Black Lives Matter generally, but no, every Black life doesn't matter, then, we're basically providing a way for us to really ferret out who's really about it and who's not. I mean, the fact is we have a lot of social justice warriors. We have a lot of political activists who look for opportunities like this to glom onto and to really revolutionize and rejigger society. We want to make sure that we don't deal with those people. We want people who are sincere about the fight. There is real plight in the Black community. And we wanted to be the organization that would stand up for the real plight that's in the Black community. Now, so we hear a lot of times people say, look, I get it. You want it to be in the same lane, but going in a different direction and reframing and this and that. But, why did you have to bring race in at all? Why didn't you just say every life matters? Here's the thing.
Right.
Here's the thing I want to remind everybody of. What we did not want to do is dismiss the fact that there's plight in the Black community. The Black community has plight from before they are born through to death. And what I mean by that is there are specific strategies to exterminate the Negro population in the womb. So we can't even get out a lot of times. So that's a plight that somebody has to stand up for. BLM is not standing up for that. Our progressive friends are not standing up for that. So we wanted to stand up for that. So we didn't want to dismiss the argument, because if we dismiss the argument and we're saying everything, oh, come on, everything's equal, everything's, all lives matter and everything. That's not really the case.
Yeah.
All lives aren't targeted in the womb. Margaret Sanger said, look, we don't want the word to get out, but we want to fully exterminate the Negro population. She called out Black folk.
That's right.
Be exterminated.
That's right.
And so we want to stand up for Black life. That's in the womb. The other thing that we have that's a plight is early childhood development. We have too many of our children being slaughtered by stray bullets, especially during the summer months. Chicago, Memphis, Detroit, New York. Somebody needs to stand up for those families. Somebody needs to come alongside and provide emotional and financial support to help that grieving family that's going through the most traumatic thing that any parent could ever imagine. Their 2-year-old, their 3-year-old, their 5-year-old, their 8-year-old being slaughtered by stray bullets coming through the house. So that's a specific plight in the Black community that nobody's really standing up for. The other plight that we see is that we do see a plight with, we don't have level playing field as far as education. Right. Now, there's a lot of anti-racists who say, yeah, well, we don't have level playing field with education and all this. But what's interesting, Jay, is they never provide the remedy. They never say, so Kendi, D'Angelo are standing up for school choice programs and parental choice programs for our education so we can level the playing field. They never say that. But they assert, oh yeah, I'm all about, making sure that we make everything equal. See, so what Neil and I have done with every Black Life Matters is we're looking at every phase of Black life through to death, from conception to the grave. And I
love that phrase. Yeah. Y'all put from the womb to the tomb. I love it.
Every phase, we're all about it, and that's what we're about. So anyway, and so here's one last thing that I would offer to your listeners. Here's the other thing that's really important that I think we need to get a sense of, because some people still aren't convinced that, well, you're still bringing race in, and that's still an issue for some people. So here's the thing. If we all said, look, all of our houses matter equally, we're all houses matter. But one house then caught fire and was on fire. Guess what we would all do? Since all houses matter, we'd all come out and put the fire out. That's the only message that we're doing here. We're not saying the other houses aren't important, but we got one house that's on fire right now. It's in the Black community. So can we just agree that, yes, there's specific plights here. Most of them are caused by progressive policies and progressives, Democrats and that kind of thing. I don't want to get political, but the fact is they're there. That's and right. So we need to work together to actually address the issues and really care about Black life, because that's important.
Come on. I appreciate it, Kevin. Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got roped into all of this. I'm sure I'm using roped very sarcastically, because I'm sure.
As Kevin said, behind every great idea is a great woman. That was my wife. She saw our neighbors who are Christians going out and protesting with BLM.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you have to, and then we talked about it. And she said, well, you have to understand, they're told that silence is violence, right? They're not racists. So where is their opportunity to express themselves and to show support for the African-American community? So they go out with BLM. But when that's the last thing, because everything the BLM, in fact, if you look at the fire example, what BLM is doing, rather than saying, hey, here's the fire extinguisher, here's the fire engine, what they're doing is they're trying to go out and saying, let's burn down the houses, and they're burning down businesses, they're burning down things, and they're saying, let's get rid of fire sprinklers in the other houses. They're trying to level the playing field rather than raise the playing field, if you understand what I'm saying. So we realized that, so she said, what do we do? What can I do? And that's when I approached Kevin. Actually, what Kevin doesn't tell you is I said, Kevin, you go solve the problem. I'm not Black.
I said, Kevin, you go figure this out.
But Kevin, he is African-American.
Yeah. And Kevin said, no, you're African-American, because I was born in Africa. I grew up in Africa. I was born in Ghana. I grew up in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Jamaica, which is still African in a sense, and then in the Middle East and Yemen. So my parents are Indian ethnicity, but I'm culturally African. And when I came here, I was culturally more African than I was Indian. So Kevin said, no, it's the old, you go to the pastor and say, Pastor, we got a problem here. The pastor says, great, you're going to fix, you're hired, right? You fix the problem. That's what Kevin did to me. I'm like, So, but what happened is we realized that God had actually put us in this right place in the right time. And I think here's my biggest worry is if we go along with BLM and critical race theory and all these other social justice movements, what will happen is they're going to blame everybody else but the real problem. And 20 years from now, they'll have blamed everybody, and the African-American communities will be in a worse situation than they are today. And worse than that, my fear is if you look at critical race theory, it's going to create a bunch of people in reaction. They'll say, look, if you're going to say white people are bad, we're going to come up with some protective organizations and societies to protect white people. And the last thing we want is that segregation of the races. We want them to merge together. We want that unity, godly unity, because Christ has reconciled us all to him. So that's one of the things. The other thing I want to add to this that Kevin mentioned, and this is the numbers when you think about it. There are 45 million African Americans in the United States right now.
Yes.
21 million have been killed through abortion. Now, let that sink in. 21 million African Americans have killed in abortion. That means there would be over 60 million, 65, 66 million African Americans. A third of them have been decimated through abortion. This is not something small. This is something huge. And as most people realize, that if you don't replenish your population, That population, if you don't have at least 2.1 births, live births per for family or individual, you're going to end up with a shrinking population. The best way to eradicate the African American population this way. The next thing is, what about giving African Americans opportunities? You know, BLM is like, oh, give us the money, we want to raise tax and all that. But look at all these corporations. Rather than sending money to BLM, why don't they? What African Americans in the inner cities, they need opportunity. They need business opportunity. But look at a company like Amazon. Amazon doesn't make money from necessarily their own sales necessarily, but they make money through other people selling on Amazon. So why on Amazon, why don't you go into the inner city and teach young African American youth how to develop their own website, their own sales system on Amazon, how teach them business practices, teach them all this. Why are you giving $100 million to BLM when in fact within you have the way to bring African American youth out of that community? Why aren't you going and saying, look, with our billions of dollars, we should be creating scholarships for African Americans? I mean, that $100 million that they gave to BLM is not going to do anything except buy houses maybe for the founders. But
they're in trouble. They're in a little bit of hot water because of that.
Yeah,
she probably should have found herself a little smaller house.
But you take that money and you start putting it into some schools. I mean, 70%, almost 70% of African American parents would love to have school choice for their kids, but their kids are brought up in an environment. And let's understand the core reason for this. Back in and again, people say, I don't want to be political. This was political from the start. Okay, you can't get away from the politics of this. You can't get away from it. I won't name the parties, but you'll know them. One party decided that they were going to create a welfare state amongst African Americans, and they were going to reward African American women for kicking the man out of the house. Right. So guess what? I mean, it was not just African Americans. They did that for everybody, but they were focusing on getting African Americans on the welfare system. So as a result, over 75% of all African American kids are born without a father in the home. Now, what does that carry? We know very clearly that causes more suicides, more gang violence. They join gangs to replace that fatherhood figure. It causes problems with their grades, it problems with their life, their economics abilities their future goes down, and you get gangs and violence and drugs in the schools. So how do you get out of that system? You're locked in here. The only way out of that today is one, we got to stop disincentivizing women for having a father in the home. And two, we got to let these kids go to a school of their choice. So, as I said, almost 70% of African-American parents would love to get a voucher to send their kids to another school. And African-Americans do great. In fact, if you look at the record of voucher system, it has brought up entire communities because those kids go out, they get jobs, and they're educated. They bring that knowledge back in. And yet the school unions and the teachers unions and the government and one party fights against that day and there. Do you really care about Black lives? I don't know.
Well, fellas, look, this is already turning into a good conversation right off the bat. Something that you brought up and you talked about how culturally, where you growing up in Africa and how that affects things. One of the premises that I've been teaching is that, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I teach all the time that I don't believe we necessarily have a race problem here in America. I believe we have a cultural issue. Yep. I think there was a time, you can go back in time and there were laws that were specifically being made to stop Black people or to stop specific races of people from doing things. When I look now, though, and I'm looking at where we are in 2021 and specifically with the number of people that I'm talking to, meeting and just learning about our history, I'm seeing cultural issues. Yeah. Because I know for a fact I'm Black, I'm African American, but if you drop me off in Ghana, as an example, I would struggle with my Black self, with all of my Black brothers, because I know nothing about that culture. I don't understand it. I didn't grow up in it. I wrote a blog where I was talking about privilege. The term white privilege is used and people sometimes struggle with that. And I said, to me, privilege it's cultural privilege. That's really what it is. And if I were to go to Ghana, the people who were living there, grew up there, where the culture is normal to them, they would have the cultural privilege. Yeah. I would have the same skin color racially, but culturally, I would be very much behind and I would have to navigate a very different world. And so when I'm explaining that to people now and I'm saying, hey, as an African American, the dominant culture is the Caucasian culture. I have to learn how to navigate some of these spaces, depending on where I go, depending on where I'm at. And now, specifically when we're asking our white brothers and sisters to start coming back our direction and understanding our history and our pain, some of the plights that you mentioned, I don't believe that most people are racist. I just don't. I think many people are ignorant. They don't know. They haven't been taught. They haven't been exposed. They're not used to the cultural differences that exist because they grew up in a homogenous area.
Yeah.
And when they're coming to our communities or our areas or even just into our conversations, I think there's so much that can be learned that keep us separated culturally. So I wanted to hear your thoughts a little bit on.
So let me add one more thing about that. I think it's very important to understand that it's not just that it's a cultural difference. I think it's it's cultural, but it's a different kind of culture. Because do you know that the Nigerians who come to America make more money than most white Americans? Mm-hmm. Right? Ghanaians who come here make more money. In fact, it's commonly known that Jamaicans who come to New York have 4 jobs and end up being rather wealthy after a while, right? I mean, they're working so hard on a daily basis. So I think there is a cultural background to that, and I think what's happened is because we have conditioned inner city, and I focus on inner city because on our website we talk about someone who grew up like in Silicon Valley with their dad as an engineer. It doesn't matter what color they are, they're going to have a different cultural thought and view of the world than somebody who grew up in the inner city and was told, you're going to go to bad schools or gangs around, you got to watch out for all these things. There's definitely a cultural impact on them. Yes. And I think the sooner we realize that and change and break that barrier and say, look, it's not your color that's keeping you away, it's basically what you've acquired growing up that has kind of given you this mentality, and your education, and the fact that you don't have a father, and the fact that you're growing up with guns and violence and all that. So I think those things all play into it. Yeah. And I think for us to ignore that is very dangerous and very heartbreaking.
I agree with you 100%. Kevin, I wanted to get your thoughts as well on, when you hear about, cultural differences and in regards to racism and everything else, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so there are cultural differences that we have to wade through, and I think that there's a new culture that's emerging, and that's by virtue of CRT, liberation theology, and social justice. And there's this new culture that's emerging that's really dividing us. It's separating our humanity here in America based upon whether you're an oppressor or you're oppressed, whether you're a person of power and influence or whether you don't. And therefore you need to sit down, shut up, give us the power and all that. So that's a whole new cultural shift. And it's the momentum is unbelievable. It's taken off and it's making a dramatic impact in our schools. It's starting with our educational systems now. They're going to be teaching children, instead of teaching them about George Washington, our first president, American Revolutionary War hero, and these types of things. They'll be talking about George Washington, the first person to occupy the Oval Office, who had a plantation and was a colonizer, and these types of things. This is very real. This is how the curriculum is going to change. And this is how our children are at risk of not understanding history, certainly not accurate history. So we all need to be concerned about the new sort of the neo-cultural shift that we're experiencing right now. It's happening. It's pervasive. People are being beat into submission. Churches are in on it. All of our institutions are in on it. And our corporations and everybody are being impacted in one way or another from this critical race theory, critical theory type notion. So, but here's what I ask our friends who position themselves as anti-racist, and it always shuts them up. So if you want to know how to shut up an anti-racist about supposedly standing up for righteousness and for, against racism, one of the things I ask is, look, you talk about 1619, you talk about, the slavery that went on in that, but you never mention the culprit. It's like you mention slavery, you mention KKK and white supremacists, you mention Dred Scott and Jim Crow, but you don't mention the organization that was behind all of those things still exists today. Why are they never mentioned? Right? Then you mention, blacks are being slaughtered every day. But when I mentioned that, you're right, they are being slaughtered every day, mercilessly, unmercifully. And it's happening in the womb because we had somebody that actually started her organization with the intent. She wrote it down. It was her vision that we want to fully exterminate the Negro population. This is her words, her vision. And how come you then, anti-racist, never mention this organization and this systemic racism happening now, today? And so I asked him, I say, look, if you are 100% certain that you will stand up against systemic racism, if I show it to you today, an organization that's about that, would you march with me? And initially in the conversation, they would say, yeah, of course. Yeah, well, okay, of course, Ken. When I bring these stats up, these inconvenient truths, they slink away. Why? If you're anti-racist, you're anti-racist. This is a racist organization. As a matter of fact, they admitted it last year. Why? What's the big deal? Do you understand what I'm saying, Jay?
I definitely understand what you're saying. Let me ask this question as I'm listening to you all. When you're looking at even like the history and the things that we're starting to learn, something that for me that was really troubling was I felt like I wasn't getting the full picture of history in general. Yeah. I think there is a balance. So I'm looking at what I was taught, and what I was taught growing up. For me personally, it didn't give me any balance of who I was, where I came from. It didn't give me any historical perspective of being an African American. It didn't tell me about what Africa actually was. It didn't tell me about the African empires that existed or all the things that Africans had done. And there were things that I was taught, to your point about our first presidents, about our, the wars and everything else. Is there not a balance of absolutely our first president and the things they accomplished and the things they created, but also, yes, also a plantation owner, also a slave owner, and allowing us to have a well-rounded view of some of the things that have happened? Again, of being able to say, hey, yes, you did some wonderful things. However, here's some other things,
Absolutely.
I was taught about Thomas Jefferson, but then when we start talking about, hey, Thomas Jefferson did have, some other kids that was slightly different shades.
Absolutely.
Acknowledging some of the real history. I feel like a lot of that has been lost. Yeah,
it has been lost, but that would be perfectly acceptable. Yeah. Because we need to know that we, our nation, our country was not started by perfect men. As a matter of fact, we need to know right now that our country is being run by imperfect people. Our current president, past president, they're all imperfect.
Yes.
So for us to hold, anybody in sort of this mind frame that, look, it was started by this person. He had these issues. He had slaves. He had this and that. Well, everybody in history has had, imperfect issues. So, really? So I think it's perfectly okay if we had a balance with that.
Yeah.
But for us to just focus on, hey, this is what's their background, so they need to be dismissed out of history. That's where I think we run into problems.
I think we should teach history like we teach like the Bible.
Yeah.
Here is David. He was a great king. He murdered a man and had
he stepped around a little bit.
Here's Moses, right? He murdered a man, but then God used him. Here, it's very clear. I mean, even Gideon. Here's Gideon. He did this great battle, and then he ended up with like 100 wives or something. Yeah. It talks about everything. It doesn't just say, "Oh, look how great a man he was," because at the end of the day, we know all of us are fallen human beings. There's only one great man, and that's Jesus Christ. There's only one pure person. So I believe that it should all be taught, absolutely. And I don't think anyone would say no, you shouldn't do that. But then when you say that's the focus of his whole life, his whole life, Washington was a slave owner. No, he was a whole bunch of other things, right? If you look at the founding fathers, and we know that many of them had these conflicting things. I mean, Jefferson is the one who said that as long as slavery exists, God's vengeance will not lie quiet. Right? He says things like that. And yet he owned slaves, right? So you see the dichotomy and you see the hypocrisy in these men's lives. But at the same time, they did see truth and they did act. And he's the one who actually pens, of course, he didn't come up with it. He pens the whole idea of the inalienable rights. That, by the way, just so you know, that came from pastors. That didn't come from Jefferson. It didn't come from the Enlightenment. The whole idea that you are endowed by inalienable rights from a creator is a very logical, rational outputting of pastors and sermons. And he took it from sermons.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you guys a few other questions. I want to learn a bit more about your organization itself. You know, what are some things that you all are doing now to help heal some of these racial divides?
So, and if I miss anything, Neil, you can jump in.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're going into communities, we're going into municipalities, we just went to a Christian school last month, and we met with the students, the administrators, the church who sponsored that particular school, their leadership. So we're going in to provide what we call our Remnant Rising workshops. We call them workshops because we're not going in to sermonize or provide a seminar. It's not front to back. We're actually, encouraging people to get involved, ask any and all questions.
Yeah.
But in that workshop, we're deconstructing critical race theory, CRT. We're fully deconstructing liberation theology, Black liberation theology. And then we're doing a compare and contrast with social justice versus biblical justice. So we follow that kind of a format in those workshops. It's very important. It brings about a way for people to process what's happening. This is what we're witnessing right now is really mind blowing. It's like, I don't know, I just show up and I just happen to be white and I'm being called all these names. What? I don't understand. People are really, they're trying to wrap their minds around what's happening. And then those that try to acquiesce and appease and try to bow to the others that are, castigating them and guilting them, they're realizing that it doesn't matter. There is no appeasement for this. You're white, so it doesn't matter. You're completely dismissed. You are being canceled. It doesn't matter whether you try to appease them and say, yeah, I'm with you, I'm anti-race. It doesn't matter. Folks, if CRT takes root, you're done if you're white, period. You're, persona non grata, you're dismissed, you're irredeemable, you're cursed. These are the terms that they use for whites, just across the board. There's no, figuring out. So we go and we try to help bring people into what really is there. We try to give them a biblical reference for how to really pray for these people, because, one of the things that I've discovered is that, and I was going to bring this up in our seminar coming up on Saturday, but I really felt an inspiration to do some study on what is it within the mind of people that they can't act rationally. And I looked at the term demoralized. And I have always thought demoralized was when I'm resigned. Okay, I lost, I'm resigned. That's one aspect of it, but just one, and it's a small aspect. Demoralized means you've been aggrieved. Your spirit, your soul has been aggrieved to such an extent that you're devoid of morals, demoralized. The foundations. So when we say, when we see these churches that are fully accepting liberation theology and Black liberation theology, these Marxist things, and sort of rejecting the gospel, they'll try to mix them. The thought is, well, why can't they see it? Well, the problem is we have a lot of people that are in need of our prayer, support, compassion, because they're demoralized. Now, they may not seem like it. They seem like they're on top. Yeah, we got these people running. But the fact is they can't process truth. They can't see logically. They can't touch rationality at this point. And an example that was given was the Germans, after Hitler was doing his thing in Auschwitz, they were still coming through the towns, and they would see the tragedies, but they had zero feeling about it.
Yeah,
they thought it was, well, and in other words, they had been beat down and aggrieved and sort of contrived to such an extent that there was nothing there. So they couldn't process the human tragedy in front of them. They didn't even see it. There was nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're experiencing now. We can't reach out to these family members and friends because if we just say one name and they go crazy. You just say, well, I saw something from Trump. Like, what's the matter with you? We can't even have so it's a demoralization. So where am I going with that? What was the question? So
basically what I was asking, what are some of the things you all are doing?
Yeah. So we're helping people to come to grips with, this is kind of the mindset that we're working with. This is the biblical reality that's there. We need to pray with people, for people. We need to ask God to really intervene on their behalf, because really, believe it or not, CRT and these other things, this liberation theology, those are a different religion altogether. They're different. They're a completely different religion unto themselves, and you can't mix them. It's impossible. You can't take a little bit of CRT and a little. It's a different religion. It's a different religious set. So we need to pray for people that are stuck in that condition, and ask God to really help bring them along again, so we could, reason together. So we're doing that. We're also feeding the poor. So we're just in Tampa a week and a half or so ago, and we sponsored a truckload of meat for some of the communities that have been that are food deserts. And that are, they experience food insecurities in the greater Tampa area. And we had a big barbecue. We had over 300 plus people that came by, and we gave them, the freshest meats. They were just slaughtered at the USDA slaughterhouse in Georgia, came down, and within 24, 48 hours, we're feeding people the freshest possible meat that they can get. Most of the meat on the shelves is 30 days, 3 weeks to 4 weeks old, because it experiences a certain amount of, putting the iodine and the ink on there to make them look red and this and that. And they go through multiple iterations of frozen, previously frozen, partially frozen, and all of that. By the time they reach, especially our table, people in the urban community, it's several weeks old and could be up to a month, a little bit over a month old. So we're giving fresh meat that have the optimum nutrition to these communities. That would be chicken, that would be beef, big steaks. There were steaks that people were walking out with who are in food deserts. They needed the help. So the other thing that we're not looking forward to, but we're positioning ourselves to be ready for the onslaught of children that are going to be unfortunately hit with stray bullets this summer. It happens every summer. It happens every summer in Chicago and other places. And these families are devastated. And we want to be able to be one of the community, organizations that come alongside and provide emotional and financial support immediate, so we can bury the babies with dignity, so we can help that family out, get through this crisis. So, and then we'll have some fatherhood things that we're going to do with other organizations as we get, kind of past the COVID thing. And so we're looking at every phase of Black life. For us, this is not about, hey, we need some more mansions. We need to throw $30,000 parties in Malibu and all of this. No, for us, it's not about that. We see real plight in the Black community, and we want to address that. So that's what
I appreciate that. Neil, I want to ask you a question and get your thoughts on this. I love what Kevin is sharing as far as what you all are doing in regards to healing the divides. But if you could tell me a little bit about what are some of your organization's specific solutions in regards for supporting Black life. You talked a little bit about it when we first came on of, hey, companies could be taking these $100 million instead of donating it. They could be doing a number of things, So what are some of the things your organization is doing to help support Black life?
Well, we're not the rich organization like VLM, so our resources are thin. But our goals are, we want to influence legislation, not in a political way, but to change the laws about chasing the father out of the home. We definitely want to enhance or change legislation on school choice so that they have that. We want to get in there and we want to start working with communities, with churches. We want to match churches with discipleship programs. One thing Kevin and I both do, we both disciple, and we think that's an important aspect. How can we get churches of all kinds to go in and focus on discipling. I mean, they have programs like the Big Brother, Big Sister, but we'd like to bring a biblical value in there where kids are actually being discipled. I disciple a number of kids, and Kevin disciples a lot of pastors, actually. And so we think that's an important thing. We think there's a whole era of fatherhood. One thing that we're working with is there's a father's rights problem in America. One thing most people don't realize is the government is incentivized to separate fathers from their kids. And this has been causing, not only is it in the Black community, but it's spreading out. There's something called Title 4D, where the state, if I understand the law correctly, the state gets 4 times the amount of money that every father or for every dollar that is put into is paid for child support. So the state has this huge incentive to create more child support systems, more kids in the foster home, all this stuff, because that's income from the federal government. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on here that people are ignorant about, and we want to educate people about that. Fatherhood initiatives, as I mentioned, the other thing that I think is very important, and we shouldn't gloss over this. Kids. So when I grew up, I grew up in Africa. I didn't know I was different from my African friends. Right? Yeah, they were darker skin color. And actually, a lot of the times, most people thought I was African too. I mean, African by ethnicity, even though I was Indian by ethnicity. In fact, the funny thing was when I wore a cap, you couldn't tell the difference, right? But all my friends had curly hair and I didn't. And I would just wear a hat and they'd be like, oh, he's just another Sudanese kid running around. But it wasn't until I grew older that I realized, oh, I'm different. And most kids they grow up, they're like, I was just talking to a lady, she said, who have 2 African-American kids, actually not African-American, African kids adopted into the family. And when this whole thing came up, she said, well, I better have the discussion because they had cousins who were adopted from Africa. She said, well, I better have that discussion. And she has a discussion with her son, and her son's like, what are you talking about? I didn't know there was anything different about them, right? Kids don't think that way, right? In fact, and a great example is a few years ago when I first came to the States, I made some friends with some American, European ancestry people. And one day he came to me and says, I have a problem. He was in college. He said, I have a problem. I have to interview somebody from a different ethnicity. And I don't know anyone from a different ethnicity. I'm like, dude, you're looking at one. He goes, oh my gosh, I never even thought about you. Right? And I'm like, well, Jose, he's Mexican. He goes, oh, I guess he is, right? We don't think that way. We're all just all together, right? We don't think, oh, someone's Mexican, somebody's Indian, somebody's African. We just are like, we're all part of the family of God. And yet, what critical race theory is, it says we want to teach kids as young as the age of 6, 7, 8, preschool to think about race. In fact, this lady was saying that their son was sent home and said, what color fruit do you associate with? And the kid was like, what do you mean, what color fruit? Why should I associate my color with a fruit? And it was supposed to help them understand their race. And he's like, what? Why? And so we see this a lot. So when we went into the schools and I wrote a book about explaining about the issues here and what the problems are for kids. But when we go into schools, we're saying, look, one, race is a construct. You're all children of God. There's only one race, and that's the human race. And I think this is very critical that we counteract all this critical race theory. For those who don't know, critical race theory basically says if you're white, you're a racist. Period. That's probably the easiest way to summarize it. I mean, they put a bunch of layers on it about oppressors and oppression and all that. But that's the answer of it. And we think that this is a very, very dangerous thing. And part of our goal is, besides the other things, is to actually address that and stop the critical race theory from being brainwashing our kids.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for that. Kevin, I'm gonna come back to you because you put out a blog post, a newsletter post that I had a good read with. Obviously, if anyone's watching and you've been paying attention to what's happening in the world, Georgia has been a hot spot around voting rights, around, voter suppression, around specifically the boycotts that have started to happen within the state of Georgia. And you wrote a newsletter that came out about your disagreement with the National Baseball League withdrawing the All-Star game from Georgia. Yeah. And I thought you made some very valid points, so I want to give you a few minutes to kind of explain why you feel the way you feel and why you believe Major League Baseball is making a mistake by withdrawing this game from being there in protest for Black lives.
Yeah. So what Georgia did is there was such a fiasco last year during the election that they were just trying to put, checks and balances back in place. I mean, they had a COVID year. They have all these excuses why things went haywire, and they can't account for votes. Even to this day, I just read yesterday, 6 months after the election, there is no chain of custody that they can account for over 5 million votes. So it's like, so they're struggling. So what they needed to do is come up with a way to reinfuse voter confidence. So when they do have elections in Georgia, that voters would actually come out. Because if you see the fiasco, you would say, I'm done. It's a rigged system. Why would I vote? It doesn't matter. They're gonna do what they do in the background to just get the outcome. So they had to do something. So what they've done is they've adopted a way to actually put some checks and balances that were reasonable checks and balances, actually even more stringent or less stringent than Colorado, where Major League Baseball moved. So here is the issue. All of these corporations that are now saying, we don't want to do business in Georgia. We want to change our headquarters. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to move the All-Star game. Fundamentally, what they're doing is they're saying, we don't want any safeguards in elections. We don't want election integrity. And it's perfectly okay for us to disenfranchise every voter. Now, here's the problem. Blacks represent a very small percent of the population in most cities. Now, in Georgia, we actually represent a larger percentage of the population, or especially in Atlanta. But in Georgia, we represent, a little bit more percentage of the population. But those votes that we cast, they're precious. We're trying to cast a vote to change the trajectory of our communities or local communities or state, whatever. And we can't, by disenfranchising anyone, it's particularly telling. It's particularly notable to the Black community that our votes are being So in other words, everybody's disenfranchised if you allow anybody and everybody to vote that should not be voting. So we had dogs voting, we had dead people voting, we had people that are in other states voting and voting multiple times. These are documented. This is not conspiracy. It's there. So they had to shore up this thing, and for corporations to pull out because they're trying to shore up their election laws just means that basically those corporations are saying it's perfectly okay for everybody to be disenfranchised. And it's okay that those precious votes that are coming from the Black community aren't counted because, it's fine. And then what they did, they doubled down and they said, we're going to move the All-Star game. That's $190 million of commerce that's happening in the All-Star week. It just so happens that the majority of people in Atlanta, where the All-Star game would be, are Black. The majority and the majority of the workforce, 51% Black folk. So they're trying to equate Jim Crow laws while taking jobs, $190 million worth of jobs. It's commerce, so it's tens of thousands of jobs away from the Black people that would have an opportunity. We're post-COVID in Georgia. They're just trying to come up, and they took those jobs away. Tens of thousands. So, I say, look, this is insanity. Major League Baseball should look for, I understand they moved the venue to Colorado, but they need to look for venues to put back in Georgia, because that's our community that's been disproportionately affected to the tunes of tens of thousands of jobs. So we need these corporations to get real, to be sincere about their commitment and stop bowing to the cancel culture and get back to Georgia. And especially Atlanta. That's where people need help. So that's what I'm standing for. So I wish I could go to Major League Baseball directly and have a desk pounding session, because what they did was callous.
Well, I felt the passion through your writing. I read through it and I said, I can feel him pounding the desk through this typewriter and through this writing that he put on there.
Yes.
And I think what's important to understand here is that they took the Major League Baseball from a state with 34% Blacks and they moved to a state with 4% Blacks. Understand the gravity of that. They took it from a higher stage of blacks to a thing that would be actually less blacks than most of the states.
Yeah. And then again, the laws in Colorado, the existing voter laws in Colorado are more stringent slightly than Atlanta, than Atlanta's new laws that they just passed. So it's like, what's your point? It doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're sacrificing the black community just because of cancel culture and because of, you know, silly people like Abrams and LeBron James and this and that. But these people aren't serious people. Why don't you talk to somebody in the community and discern what's the right thing to do? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes back to, does every black life really matter to you? Because the way I would see it, that would be a racist move.
Yeah.
Let's take more white people, right? The more white folk. You know, if I spoke that way, that would be the first thing I would think about, right? And this is the tragedy.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the perspective was definitely worth, you know, us having a conversation around, because you don't think about the impact. I think there are people that would withdraw, whether it's funds or money. Those are absolutely, because America is what it is. Those are rights that everyone has that they can do. But I thought that the perspective you brought it back to was of how it actually impacts the lives that you're saying you're doing this for.
Right.
I thought that was something that very much, you know, to be thought of. You know, Neil, to your point, I hadn't even put that part together with, hey, look at where you took it. And those are realities. Let me ask you this question. We're coming up. We got about another 5 minutes or so left. I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the segregation that I see within the Christian church. And before we came live, we were having some conversations around who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And, you know, just the reality of what I believe he expects out of us. He expects us to love. He expects us to treat our neighbors as we would want to be treated.
Yeah.
Jesus broke every law that, you know, religious rule of the day said you shouldn't do. He broke his own cultural laws and talking to women and talking to different cultures of the Samaritans and, you know, healing people on the Sabbath. And he did a number of things because of just his overall value of people. Why do you believe there's such segregation? Or do you? I guess that maybe we should start there. Do you believe there's segregation within the church? And if so, how do we begin fixing that?
Let me
please go Neil, and then we'll go after.
Just clarify, Jesus didn't break any biblical laws. He broke a lot of traditional and cultural laws.
Absolutely.
Right. So, but so here's, and Kevin will speak to what is happening, how the church is getting divided. And I'll give you plenty of time, I hope. So basically, when I first came to the States, having grown up in African churches and, you know, the Sudan Interior Mission and churches like that, I went to Alabama my first summer here, and I was working in Alabama. And I was invited to an African American church. First time I'd ever been in an African American church. And it was such a huge cultural difference for me. I mean, I've grown up in African churches, and yet I went to an African American church, and I'm like, wow, this is completely different from anything I've ever been to. And it wasn't until many years. And so when I came back to college, and then I started going to things that were a bit closer to what I'd grown up with. And I realized that the real reason is, and then another piece of information is that when my parents came from India to stay in this, because I sponsored them to come in. You know, once I became a U.S. citizen, it took me 12 years to be a U.S. citizen, and then I sponsored them to come over here. The first thing they did is they went to an Indian church.
Yes.
And when I went to the Indian church, I was also like, whoa, I've never been to an Indian church like this before. I hadn't grown up in an Indian church. And so I went back to what was common to me, what was natural, what was just felt more comfortable to me. And I think that's what you're seeing. You don't see the Indian church in the Marthoma church where my parents were. They weren't saying going, oh, how do we get more white people to come to our church? They didn't care about that. They're like, this is how we've always done church in India for the last 2,000 years, because we date our ancestry back to 51 AD in St. Thomas. That's how we do church. And if other people want to come and join, they're fine. And there were a few people that joined that weren't Indians, because they loved the tradition and all that. And I think that's what you're seeing today. You're not seeing a segregation by color. You're seeing a segregation by tradition.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's a good way to put it. I would say that, you know, the reality is there are different cultures that worship in different ways. And there's different people that have grown up comfortable in one way or another. So just a variety of ways. And when we tend to go worship, we're looking for something that we're familiar with. And sometimes when we go to a white church, or when we go to a black church, or when we go to a Pentecostal church, where people are jumping over pews and speaking in tongues, if you haven't grown up in that, you're not accustomed to that. And that's different. So what people are seeing is that they have a preference. Now, I do think that we can be intentional to break that divide, but it's a matter of intentionality for everybody.
Sure.
So for me as a black man, I have to be intentional about wanting to worship with my white or Indian brothers and their respective worship centers. And for them, they have to be intentional about wanting to worship with us. So I think we can do better, but I don't think it's, those white people are there, I don't want to see them. Or, that's a black church, we don't want to go there. No, I don't think it's that. I think it's a matter of worship and culture. You're going to churches where you feel, most comfortable, where so I think that's where the divide is. But I do think that we can all do better and be intentional about worshiping, so we can really help to, unify the body.
I agree with you. I think there is a level of intentionality, specifically for those who desire that. I grew up in a black church, and I remember, having some friends who were not black, and they would ask, hey, this is an all black church. Are you guys looking to try to bring in other cultures? Are you trying to attract other cultures? And, to Neil's point, we're like, not specifically. If you like what we do, you're welcome here. If you don't, you should probably find someplace else, because we probably not changing. Because this was, and I'll speak at least for me and for a lot of my friends and family, this was one of the few places where you got to choose your preference for how you wanted to worship, the type of people you wanted to be around. And that was everything from the music to the style to everything else. Church is very much a personal decision.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And most of our lives throughout the rest of the week, we have to compromise. You have to navigate a lot of different things, just because that's just life. Yeah. But church became a very personal decision where, hey, I can go exactly where I want to go and get exactly what's normal to me. But now you have people who are saying, hey, we desire to bring in other cultures.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, to your point, am I willing to navigate what traditions may exist in other cultures? Am I willing to give up some of the things that may be important to me to welcome someone else into these circles? And that is absolutely very intentional. You don't do that accidentally.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the parting words, I know you're getting to the end of your hour, but the parting words is I think the church can do better. I think that if we're going to be representative of the kingdom of God here on earth, then we need to do better. It is going to require us to be intentional, and to really expand our level of worship, to different worship styles, different songs, different, we may need to develop a different worship palette for the types of songs or choirs or, worship music that's going forth, or different style of preaching and teaching. So, but we can get there, but it's not something that we're going to just get there with, sort of organically. It's an intentional move.
I very much agree with you. Neil, I want to give you, any last words kind of on that whole topic.
I think we should stop looking for what we think is racism, segregation, and realize that we are all one in Christ. He's broken the dividing line between us, and he's merged us all into one people. And I think it'd be great for churches to get together on occasion and worship together. And I love, what I loved about it is the gospel music, the singing, and all that. Yeah. Right. And I would love to see that in my church. I always tell the pastor, I'm like, hey, you need to get a black worship leader to come in, because that's wonderful. So absolutely, I think we need to do more of that. But again, it depends on traditions. And I remember when rock music came into the church, people were leaving because they didn't like that. Right?
Yeah. I think there's just so much education, and that becomes, I know even on me as a pastor, education has to play a role in that. We're being very intentional. We have a multicultural congregation here, and some of the conversations that we're having behind the scenes again, it doesn't happen just organically. You have to be willing to have the conversations. You have to be willing to push some envelopes and push some buttons and challenge some people sometimes in their level of comfort in all cultures. Hey, I want more of this. Like, yeah, you know, okay, that's not necessarily bad, but what does that mean for these people over here, though, who have given up this? And what else are you willing to give up to get that?
That's right.
And how do you move this forward at a place to where we're not ostracizing people? You know, I've always believed the church should be the safest place on earth for anybody to walk into, where we want people to feel like they belong, and not just that you're welcome, but that you do belong there.
Yep.
And when you're looking at what we're talking about now of bringing cultures together, I think it absolutely has to be an intentional thing. And I believe that God is honored when we accomplish that, when we can put some of our needs and wants on the back burner and say, I'm willing to put some of the things that you like, some of the things you enjoy, some of the traditions that are important to you. I'm willing to allow and to push for and celebrate some of those. And when we all do that for each other, I think it makes a world of difference.
It does. It does.
Well, fellas, I want to say thank you to you all just for this time. And Kevin, you had something else?
Yeah. Before we go, can I just give the website? It's
please.
It's everyblm.com. Everyblm.com. And we also have this Saturday a special Zoom, publicly available Zoom call that will be on. It's a live Zoom call where we'll be talking about Black liberation theology. So we'll be fully deconstructing that. James Cone, where it comes from, liberation theology, Black liberation theology, the whole bit. And so please join us. If you want to join us, go to our website. We should have some information there. You'd have to pre-register today, latest tomorrow morning, because we have to get those pre-registrations in. But please join us, and if, you know, you'll get some additional feedback and information that way.
Awesome. Well, fellas, thank you all so much for your time. These are the type of conversations I feel that we have to have more of.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just want you all to know how much I appreciate what you're doing and the work that you're doing. Definitely going to keep you in prayer, because I know it's not always easy. And you're stepping on a lot of toes a lot of times of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, I'm sure. Yeah. But please know, you know, just how thankful we are for what's happening. And, you know, for anybody that's watching, please, again, go to the website, check them out, keep track of what's happening. Yeah. Check out my website as well at plainenglishinc.org. Check out the work that I'm doing, the things that are happening, the conversations that are going on. You know, both of our organizations are working in the areas of consulting and training and just looking to push the narrative, looking to change what's happening, looking to make a difference, and also to do it from a biblical standpoint. And that's what I love most about what we're trying to accomplish and what I believe God is doing in this time. So you all, I'm going to let you get back to the rest of your day. And I know the time frame is a little different. I think it's a little earlier where you guys are than it is for me.
Yeah.
But I just want to say how much I appreciate you all. And I look forward to connecting more and hopefully having more conversations in the future.
Thank you,
Joe. Appreciate it, man.
All right, you all. Everybody take care, and we will talk to you all soon.